I was 17, the night my father told me I didn't belong in his house anymore. It was late October in a town called Briar Glen, the kind of small Pennsylvania town where everyone knew your name but never your story. The leaves were dying in soft shades of red and gold, and the air smelled like wood smoke and early winter. Inside our two-story colonial house on Maple Ridge Drive, everything smelled like lemon polish and control. My name is Layla Whitmore. And that night, I stopped being their daughter. It started with a letter. A thin, white envelope with the crest of Northbridge Academy printed in navy blue at the top. I had hidden it under my mattress for 3 days before I gathered the courage to open it. I already knew what it said. I just needed proof. I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor when I finally unfolded it. Congratulations, Layla Whitmore. You have been awarded a full academic scholarship. Full academic scholarship. Not partial. Not maybe. Full. I read it 5 times, just to make sure it was real. Northbridge Academy wasn't just a college. It was the college. Prestigious, private, expensive enough that people in Briar Glen only whispered about it. And they wanted me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just pressed the paper against my chest and let myself breathe for the first time in years. I thought my parents would be proud. That was my first mistake. My father, Thomas Whitmore, believed in one thing: control. Control over the house. Control over money. Control over me. My mother, Elaine, believed in keeping peace. Peace in our house meant silence. When I walked downstairs with the letter trembling in my hand, they were in the kitchen. My father sat at the head of the table, reading the local paper like he did every night. My mother was washing dishes that were already clean. I got something, I said. My voice sounded small. My father didn't look up, then say it. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his jaw tightened. My mother stopped scrubbing. It's a full scholarship, I whispered. I won't need tuition money. I can work part-time for housing. Silence. Then my father folded the letter once, neatly. You applied without telling me. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. Another mistake. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood. You think you're leaving? He asked, voice calm in that terrifying way. I earned this, I said. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself. It's an opportunity. You don't get opportunities. I don't approve. My mother finally spoke. Thomas, she worked very hard. He slammed the letter onto the table. You will attend Briar County Community College. You will live here. You will follow this family's plan. Plan. The plan was simple. Stay. Obey. Marry safe. Dreams weren't part of it. I'm going, I said. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew something irreversible had happened. My father's eyes changed. Cold, final. Then you don't do it under my roof. My stomach dropped. I'm not asking you for money. That's not the point. He walked to the front door and opened it. The October wind rushed inside. You walk out to chase your big city fantasy, he said quietly. Don't come back. My mother gasped. Thomas, she's 17. She's chosen, he replied. I stood there frozen. This wasn't supposed to happen. Parents were supposed to argue, threaten, eventually soften. But my father didn't soften. He waited. I could feel the whole house holding its breath. I thought about apologizing. About saying I'd stay. About folding myself back into the shape they wanted. Instead, I went upstairs. I packed 1 suitcase. 3 pairs of jeans. 2 sweaters. My scholarship letter. A childhood photo of my grandmother holding my hand. My grandmother had been the only one who ever told me I was capable of more than Briar Glen. She died when I was 14. After that, the house became quieter. Heavier. When I came back downstairs, My mother's eyes were red. "Layla," she whispered, "just tell him you'll think about it." I wanted her to stop him, to choose me. She didn't. My father stepped aside, holding the door open. No yelling. No dramatic explosion. Just dismissal. "You're not my responsibility anymore," he said. And just like that, I walked out. 17 years old. One suitcase. No car. No money. The door shut behind me. Locked. I didn't cry until I reached the bus station. Briar Glens Station was barely more than a bench and a flickering overhead light. The last bus to Philadelphia left at 10:45 p.m. I had exactly $12 in my wallet. The ticket cost $11. I bought it, sat on the bench, and stared at the dark road ahead. I kept expecting headlights to pull up. My mother rushing out. My father changing his mind. No one came. When the bus finally arrived, I stepped on without looking back. That was the night I stopped being their daughter. What I didn't know then was this. 20 years later, a lawyer would stand in that same house on Maple Ridge Drive and say my name like it still belonged there. Layla Whitmore is the sole beneficiary. $4.2 million. But that story begins long after the bus ride. Because first, I had to survive. The bus smelled like diesel and cheap coffee. I didn't sleep the entire ride to Philadelphia. I kept replaying the door shutting. The click of the lock. 17 years old and already erased. When the skyline finally appeared through the dirty window, I felt two things at once. Terror and freedom. Philadelphia didn't welcome me. It swallowed me. Northbridge Academy's campus looked nothing like Briar Glen. Ivy-covered buildings, students in tailored coats, laughter that sounded expensive. I arrived with one suitcase and $11 less than I had the night before. My scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover life. Housing required a deposit I didn't have. Food required money. Money required time. And time required stability. I had none of it. The first week, I slept in the campus library. There was a corner behind the philosophy shelves that security rarely checked. I learned the guard's routine by the second night. I would wait until closing. Pretend to leave. Slip back in when someone else exited. Curl up with my coat as a blanket. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary is a powerful lie. By day, I was invisible. I sat in the front row of every lecture, took perfect notes, spoke only when necessary. No one knew I washed my face in public bathroom sinks. No one knew my dinner was a 99-cent vending machine sandwich split across 2 meals. No one knew that when people talked about going home for Thanksgiving, I had nowhere to go. I refused to call my parents. I refused to prove them right. 2 weeks in, the bursar's office sent an email. Housing balance overdue. I stared at the number on the screen. $1,140. It might as well have been $1 million. I walked into the financial aid office the next morning, heart hammering. The woman behind the desk wore red lipstick and impatience. "You didn't list parental income," she said. "They don't support me," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "You're 17. I turn 18 in 3 months. That's not how the system works." The system didn't care that my father locked the door. The system cared about signatures. Tax returns. Proof. I left with nothing. That night, I applied to every job within walking distance. Coffee shops, bookstores, grocery stores, cleaning services. By the end of the week, I was working 3 part-time jobs. Mornings at a cafe. Afternoons shelving books. Nights cleaning office buildings downtown. I slept 4 hours a night. Sometimes less. But I paid the deposit. I moved into a shared dorm room with a girl named Marissa, who smelled like vanilla perfume and privilege. She assumed I was mysterious. I didn't correct her. The first time I nearly broke was in December. Snow covered the campus. Students decorated their dorm doors with wreaths. Marissa left for Aspen with her family. "Are you going home?" she asked casually while zipping her suitcase. "No," I said. She didn't ask why. I was alone in the dorm for 3 days before the heating system malfunctioned. It was Christmas Eve. The maintenance office was closed. I wrapped myself in every piece of clothing I owned and sat on the floor shaking. And for the first time since I left Briar Glen, I almost called my mother. My thumb hovered over her number. I imagined her whispering, "Just come home." But home wasn't a place anymore. It was a condition. And I had been disqualified. I put the phone down and survived the night. Years blurred after that. Freshman became sophomore. Sophomore became senior. I graduated with honors. No one in the audience clapped for me. I clapped for myself. I didn't invite them. After college, I didn't chase dreams. I chased stability. I took a junior analyst job at a logistics firm. It wasn't glamorous. It paid consistently. I worked. I learned. I stayed quiet. People underestimated me. I let them. At 23, I was promoted. At 25, I was managing a team twice my age. At 27, I bought my first car. At 28, I stopped checking my bank account with fear. At 30, I realized something dangerous. I didn't miss them anymore. But the past doesn't disappear. It waits. One evening, 13 years after I left Briar Glen, I received an email with a subject line that made my chest tighten. Whitmore Family Estate, notice. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. I stared at the sender. A law office based in Pennsylvania. I didn't open it. Not that night. Not the next. Because opening, it meant acknowledging that some part of me still belonged to that house on Maple Ridge Drive. And I wasn't sure I could survive that twice. What I didn't know then was that the email wasn't about my parents. It was about someone else. Someone who had been watching. Someone who had never stopped believing I deserved more. And when the time came, they would leave me everything. I didn't open the email for 5 days. 5 days of pretending it didn't exist. 5 days of staring at the subject line. Whitmore Family Estate, Notice of Representation. By then, I was 37 years old. 2 decades removed from Maple Ridge Drive. 2 decades of building a life that had nothing to do with them. Or so I thought. On the 6th night, I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my kitchen table, and clicked. The message was brief. Ms. Layla Whitmore. Our office represents the estate of Margaret Whitmore. You are listed as a primary beneficiary in her will. We request your presence in Briar Glen for a formal reading scheduled in 2 weeks. Respectfully, Holloway and Pierce Law Associates. Margaret Whitmore. My grandmother. The only person who had ever held my face in her hands and said, "You are not meant for small rooms, Layla." She had died when I was 14. Or at least, that's what I had been told. I read the email again. Estate. Primary beneficiary. 2 weeks. My heart pounded so hard I had to stand up. This didn't make sense. I had attended her funeral. I remembered the lilies, the closed casket, my father's stiff posture, my mother's blank expression. I remembered crying so hard I thought I would drown. If she had truly died when I was 14, why was there an estate now? And why was I only hearing about it 23 years later? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I searched public records. Margaret Whitmore, Briar Glen, Pennsylvania. There it was. Date of death, 3 months ago. 3 months. Not 23 years. 3. My hands started shaking, which meant one thing. They lied. They told me my grandmother was dead when she was, and I never got to see her again. The next morning, I called the number in the email. A calm male voice answered. Holloway and Pierce. This is Layla Whitmore, I said. My voice felt distant. I received an email about Margaret Whitmore. A pause. Yes, Ms. Whitmore, we've been trying to reach you. Trying, I repeated. We were instructed not to contact you until certain conditions were met. By who? Another pause. Your grandmother. The room felt smaller. She knew where I was. Yes. My throat tightened. She was alive. Yes. No apology. No explanation. Just fact. Why didn't she contact me? I whispered. That is something she addressed in her personal letter to you. Personal letter. I closed my eyes. I'll be there, I said. Driving back to Briar Glen felt like rewinding time. The roads were narrower than I remembered. The houses smaller. The town sign faded. But the air still smelled like wood smoke and memories. I hadn't been back since the night I left. I told myself I was strong, that I didn't care. But when Maple Ridge Drive appeared in the distance, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. The house looked the same. White shutters, brick steps, the same oak tree in the yard. But the curtains were different, and there was a for sale sign in the lawn. Something twisted in my chest. I didn't stop. The will reading was held at Holloway and Pierce's office downtown. A small brick building with frosted glass windows. When I walked inside, the receptionist looked up. You must be Layla. I nodded. You're the last one to arrive. Last one. That meant they were already there. The conference room smelled like old paper and tension. And sitting at the polished wooden table were the people who erased me. Thomas Whitmore. Older now, thinner, his hair nearly gray. Elaine Whitmore. Still composed, still quiet. They both looked up when I entered. For a split second, something flickered across my mother's face. Guilt. Or fear. My father's expression hardened instantly. You came, he said. It wasn't warm. It wasn't welcoming. It was assessing. I was invited, I replied. 20 years, and the air between us was still ice. I took a seat at the far end of the table. No one spoke. The lawyer entered moments later. Thank you all for coming, he said. We are here to review the last will and testament of Margaret Whitmore. My heart pounded so loudly, I could barely hear the next words. He began reading. Small donations to charities. A church fund. A local library. Then, I leave the Whitmore residence on Maple Ridge Drive. My father straightened. To be liquidated upon my passing. My father frowned. Liquidated. Proceeds, the lawyer continued calmly, to be divided as follows. The room felt charged. 10% to Thomas Whitmore. My father exhaled slightly. 10% to Elaine Whitmore. My mother looked down. And 80% to Layla Whitmore. Silence. Complete. Stunned. Silence. My father's chair scraped against the floor. That's impossible, he said sharply. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The estate, after property sale and investment accounts, totals approximately $4.2 million. The number echoed. 4.2 million. Which meant 80%. $3.36 million. My breathing stopped. My father's face drained of color. There must be a mistake, he snapped. She was a minor when. The lawyer interrupted calmly. There is no mistake. Additionally, Margaret Whitmore included a clause stating that Layla Whitmore was to be informed of her passing only after her 18th birthday, and only if she had left the Whitmore residence voluntarily. The words hit like thunder. Left voluntarily. My father's jaw tightened. She left on her own, he said quickly. The lawyer looked at me. Did you? The room tilted. The memory of the open door. The cold air. The words, "You're not my responsibility anymore." I met my father's eyes. No, I said. Silence swallowed the room. The lawyer nodded slowly. In that case, Ms. Whitmore, the clause stands. You are the primary beneficiary. My mother began to cry softly. My father said nothing. For the first time in my life. He had no control over the outcome. But the lawyer wasn't finished. There is also a personal letter, addressed solely to Layla Whitmore. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Margaret Whitmore. My grandmother. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Heavier than money. Heavier than inheritance. Because whatever was inside would explain why they told me she was dead, and why she waited 20 years to speak again. I didn't open it there. I couldn't. Instead, I stood, without looking at my parents, without saying goodbye, and walked out of the office with an envelope worth more than $4 million. But it wasn't the money that made my knees weak. It was the truth. And I had a feeling. The truth was going to hurt. I didn't open the letter in my car. I didn't open it in a cafe. I didn't open it anywhere near Briar Glen. I drove 40 minutes out of town until the streets turned into open highway and the houses disappeared. There was a quiet overlook I remembered from childhood, a place my grandmother once took me to watch the sunset when I was 9. She had told me, when everything feels small, come somewhere wide. So I parked there. The wind was sharp, the sky stretched endlessly gray. And for the first time in 20 years, I allowed myself to feel like someone's granddaughter again. I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, familiar handwriting slanted slightly to the right. My dearest Layla, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. 1, I have finally left this world for good. 2, you were brave enough to leave that house. My throat tightened. I kept reading. I did not die when you were 14. The words blurred instantly. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to focus. Your father told you I did because I refused to support his decisions regarding you. He believed you needed to be controlled. I believed you needed to be free. My chest felt like it was cracking open. When I objected to the way he spoke to you, the way he minimized your intelligence, he cut contact. He told you I had passed because it was easier than admitting he could not control me either. The air left my lungs. They didn't just throw me out. They erased her too. I watched from afar Layla. Not because I did not love you, but because I knew if I reached out before you left that house, he would use me to keep you there. I made a decision I will carry into eternity. I stayed silent so you would not. My vision blurred again. She knew. She knew I would leave. She trusted me to choose freedom. The letter continued. I moved to Vermont after the estrangement. I invested what remained of your grandfather's company shares. They grew beyond what I expected. The majority of my estate is yours, not because you were wronged, but because you were brave. Your father believes obedience is loyalty. I believe courage is. My hands shook so violently, I had to place the paper on my lap. There is something else you deserve to know. I stopped breathing. The night you were forced out was not about college. It was about control. Thomas discovered that I had placed a separate educational trust in your name when you were 13. He was not listed as trustee. You were. The world tilted. Trust. In my name. At 13. He confronted me, demanded I dissolve it. I refused. He told me if I did not, he would remove you from my life entirely. I told him you were not a possession. He told me neither was I. Tears fell freely now. The letter felt like a map to everything that never made sense. He locked you out because he believed you would come back. Because he believed the world would scare you. Because he believed you needed him. I knew you didn't. My heart pounded so loudly it echoed in my ears. The final lines were steadier. Layla, money is not power, it is protection. Use it to build a life that does not require anyone's permission. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember you left at 17 with nothing. That kind of strength cannot be taught. It can only be survived. With all my love. Grandmother. The wind lifted the edge of the paper. I pressed it flat against my chest. She had been alive. Alive all those years. Investing. Planning. Believing. In me. Not in spite of my father. But because of him. He tried to limit me. She made sure I would never be limited again. I sat there for nearly an hour. Watching the sky darken. Letting the truth settle into my bones. The money no longer felt shocking. It felt intentional. Strategic. Like a final move in a chess game my father didn't realize he was playing. When I finally returned to Briar Glen to collect official documents from the lawyer's office, my father was waiting outside. He leaned against his car like he used to when he waited to pick me up from school. Only this time, he wasn't in control. "You're not going to take everything," he said without greeting. "It wasn't yours," I replied calmly. "She manipulated you." "No," I said softly, "you tried to." His jaw tightened. "You think money makes you better than us." I looked at him carefully. At the lines in his face. At the cracks in his certainty. "No," I said, "but it means I never have to need you." That was the first time he flinched. My mother stepped out of the passenger seat. Her eyes were swollen. "We didn't think you'd actually leave," she whispered. The words were almost more painful than anger. "You locked the door," I said. She had no response. Because there wasn't one. The lawyer handed me final documentation. The total estate value had finalized at $4.2 million after liquidations and investments. 80% to me. The educational trust my grandmother had mentioned. It had matured separately. Another $380,000 untouched. My father hadn't known it still existed. He had failed to dismantle the one thing he feared most. My independence. As I drove away from Briar Glen that second time, something felt different. The first time, I left as a frightened 17-year-old. This time, I left as the woman they never expected me to become. They kicked me out thinking the world would crush me. Instead, it sharpened me. And now, 20 years later, I wasn't returning for revenge. I was leaving with closure. And freedom worth $4.2 million. But money changes more than bank accounts. It changes relationships. It changes perception. And what I didn't realize yet was that Briar Glen wasn't done with me. Not even close. News travels fast in small towns. But money travels faster. By the time I returned to Philadelphia, 3 different people from Briar Glen had sent me friend requests on social media. People who hadn't spoken to me since high school. People who watched me walk down Maple Ridge Drive with a suitcase and said nothing. The captions circulating online read, "Whitmore Estate leaves millions to estranged daughter." Estranged. That word carried no blame. No locked door. No 17-year-old girl standing in October wind. Just distance. Clean, neutral, convenient. I ignored the requests. Ignored the messages. Until one name appeared that made me pause. Mrs. Delaney. My former English teacher. The only teacher who had ever written on my S. "You don't belong in this town." Not as an insult. As prophecy. Her message was short. I always knew you'd leave differently than they expected. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I didn't plan on coming back. Her response came quickly. Sometimes coming back isn't about staying. It's about being seen. I didn't respond, but the words stayed with me. 3 days later, I received another call from Holloway and Pierce. There's a matter requiring your signature in person, the lawyer explained. A final clause. I hesitated. I was there already. This pertains to the Whitmore residence specifically. My grandmother's house. I closed my eyes. I'll come tomorrow. The for sale sign was gone when I arrived. Instead, a small pending placard hung beneath it. The house looked emptier, like it was holding its breath. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood. The lawyer stood in the living room with a folder in hand. There is an addendum, he said carefully. Your grandmother specified that if you chose to, you could purchase the home from the estate at market value before liquidation. Purchase it, I echoed, at a significantly reduced internal rate. The number he showed me was less than a quarter of what the property would sell for publicly. My grandmother hadn't just given me money. She given me choice. The choice to reclaim the place where I was erased. Or let it go. I walked through the house slowly. The staircase, where I used to sit and read. The kitchen table, where my scholarship letter was folded like a threat. My old bedroom door creaked when I pushed it open. The walls were repainted, but I could still see faint outlines where posters once hung. I stood in the center of the room. 17-year-old me had packed a suitcase here, crying silently, believing she was disposable. Now I stood there worth millions, stronger than I'd ever imagined. And the house felt smaller than it ever had. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Layla, the voice was hesitant. Yes. It's Daniel Mercer. The name hit like a forgotten memory. Daniel had lived 2 houses down when I was growing up. We used to bike together in summer, until high school changed everything. I heard you were back, he said. Small town, I replied. There was a pause. I saw you leave that night, he said quietly. My stomach tightened. You did. I was across the street. My dad told me not to get involved. Of course he did. I always wondered what happened, he continued. They told everyone you ran off. I laughed softly. They would. Another pause. Is it true, he asked carefully, about the inheritance? Yes. Silence. Not judgment. Not envy. Just processing. You deserve it, he said finally. And for some reason, that simple sentence felt heavier than the lawyer's announcement. Because Daniel remembered me before I was erased. Later that evening, I drove past my parents' house. Not to see them, just to see if it felt different. The curtains were drawn. The porch light flickered. For the first time, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt fragile. Power had shifted. Not because of money, but because truth had surfaced. People were asking questions now. Why hadn't I visited my grandmother for 20 years? Why was I absent from every family gathering? Why did the will mention estrangement? Small towns survive on stories. And this one was unraveling. The next morning, Mrs. Delaney called. The school board heard about the estate, she said. They're trying to raise funds to prevent program cuts. I didn't answer immediately. Layla, she continued gently, you don't owe this town anything. I knew that. But something inside me stirred. Not obligation. Not revenge. Something else. Control. They once decided my future for me. What if I decided theirs? That afternoon, I signed the paperwork. But not for the house. For something else. I requested a meeting with the Briar Glen School Board. When I entered the auditorium a week later, every seat was filled. Whispers followed me down the aisle. Some curious, some guilty, some calculating. The principal cleared his throat nervously. "We understand you've requested to address funding concerns." "Yes," I said calmly. My father sat in the third row. He hadn't expected this. Neither had the town. "I will be establishing a scholarship fund," I announced. Murmurs rippled through the room. "In my grandmother's name." More whispers. The principal leaned forward eagerly. "That's incredibly generous." "There's one condition," I said. Silence fell. The air thickened. "The scholarship will be awarded to students pursuing out-of-state universities." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "And," I continued evenly, "it will include housing and living expenses." Now the tension was visible. Because this town didn't like losing its children. It liked keeping them close. Contained. "I want no student here to stay because they're afraid they can't afford to leave," I finished. The room was quiet. I looked directly at my father. I don't believe in control disguised as protection. His jaw tightened. But he said nothing. For the first time in my life. He had no authority in the room. After the meeting, Daniel approached me outside. "You just changed this town," he said softly. "No," I replied. "I just gave them a door." He smiled faintly. "And if they walk through it, that's up to them." That night, I stood once more on Maple Ridge Drive. But I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel loss. I felt something quieter. Completion. They kicked me out at 17, believing I would come back smaller. 20 years later, I returned taller. Not because I inherited $4.2 million, but because I survived without it. And tomorrow, I was leaving Briar Glen again. For good. But before I could, there was one more knock at my hotel door. And when I opened it, everything shifted one last time. The knock came at 9:17 p.m. 3 firm taps. Not hesitant. Not uncertain. Deliberate. I had just finished packing. My flight back to Philadelphia left at 6:40 a.m. I wasn't planning on seeing anyone else before I left Briar Glen for the second and final time. I opened the door. It was my father. Thomas Whitmore looked smaller than I remembered, not physically. Authority-wise. He stood in the dim hallway light, hands at his sides, jaw tight like he'd rehearsed something and forgotten it. "Can I come in?" he asked. It was the first time in my life he had ever asked permission. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, scanning the room like he expected it to judge him. Neither of us sat down. "I won't take much of your time," he began stiffly. Time. That was ironic. "You made a spectacle at the school," he continued. I folded my arms. "I made an opportunity. You embarrassed this family." I let the silence stretch between us. "What family?" I asked calmly. He flinched. Just slightly. But enough. "I did what I thought was best," he said after a moment. "For who?" I replied. "For you." A humorless laugh escaped me. "You locked me out at 17. You defied me." "There it is," I said softly. His expression hardened. "You were a child. I was your daughter." The word hung between us like something fragile. He didn't respond. Because he couldn't. "I didn't think you'd make it," he admitted finally. The honesty stunned me more than the argument. "You thought I'd fail," I said. "I thought the world would teach you humility." "It did," I replied evenly, "just not the kind you expected." He looked away. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't hatred that drove him. It was fear. He had grown up in Briar Glen. Worked in Briar Glen. Married in Briar Glen. His world had boundaries. I threatened them, and instead of expanding, he tried to shrink me. She turned you against me, he muttered suddenly. Grandmother, I asked. She filled your head with ideas. I shook my head slowly. She filled my head with belief. That belief cost us our relationship. No, I said quietly, your control did. Silence. Heavy, final. He looked older than his years in that moment. $4.2 million, he said, almost to himself. All because she refused to listen. All because she believed I should have a choice. His jaw tightened again. But the fight had drained from him. I came here, he said stiffly, to ask something. I waited. He swallowed once. The house. My expression didn't change. I want to buy it, he continued, before you decide anything. So that was it. Not reconciliation. Real estate. You don't have the funds, I said. He didn't deny it. I can arrange financing. You couldn't afford my housing deposit 20 years ago, I replied. What changed? His silence answered for him. Pride. Perception. Appearances. I'm not buying it, I said finally. He blinked. You're not. No. Relief flickered across his face until I continued. I'm donating it. The word landed like a strike. To who? He asked sharply. To the Scholarship Foundation. His face drained of color. You can't be serious. I am. That house is a Whitmore property. It was Margaret Whitmore's property, I corrected, and she wanted it liquidated. You're making a mistake. No, I said softly, I'm making a decision. And that was the difference. He stared at me for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. His shoulders sagged. Not dramatically. Just enough. I didn't know how to raise someone like you, he admitted quietly. The room went still. That was the closest thing to vulnerability I had ever heard from him. You didn't need to control me, I replied. You just needed to trust me. He didn't argue. Because maybe, just maybe, he understood it now. 20 years too late. When he reached the door, he paused. You don't owe us anything, he said without turning around. No, I agreed. And then he added, barely audible. But I am proud of you. The words hit harder than anger ever had. I didn't know if he meant them. I didn't know if he even knew how to. But he said them. And that was enough. He left. The door closed gently behind him. No slamming. No locking. Just quiet. The next morning, I finalized the property transfer paperwork. The Whitmore residence would be converted into a community academic center, housing mentorship programs and scholarship offices. The same house that once shut me out would now help others walk forward. Poetic, maybe. Or just necessary. At the airport, I received one final email from Holloway and Pierce. All funds had been transferred. After taxes and distributions, my total assets stood just over $4.2 million, not including my grandmother's separate matured trust. Combined value, approximately $4.58 million. I stared at the numbers. They didn't feel real. Not because of their size, but because of what they represented. Not revenge. Not validation. Protection. Exactly as she said. As the plane lifted off, Briar Glen grew smaller beneath the clouds. The first time I left, I felt abandoned. This time, I felt complete. They kicked me out at 17, believing I needed them to survive. They were wrong. And 20 years later, I didn't come back to prove anything. I came back to finish something. Money changed my circumstances, but resilience changed my life. And that was something no one could ever take away. If this story moved you even a little, don't just scroll away. Like this video so more people can hear Layla's story. Comment below, would you have forgiven them? And if you believe strength is built in silence, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next story might hit even deeper. See you in the next one.